Today we're going to be doing a baby quilt. So I have a baby shower coming up in about a week. I was just really inspired by some of these fabrics at Joann's. So this one, this cute little Loch Ness monster, it was just adorable. I loved it. This is for a little boy, but I didn't want to go overly too masculine. So we also have this little camping fabric. Then to pull off of the orange, I did this little plaid. Then we have Twinkle Twinkle Little Star and two different planes. I really liked the way these looked with the Loch Ness Monster to kind of go with the mountain and like the water, the little dragon monster, whatever. This is going to be our border. Again, I just thought it went really well with all of the fabrics. This is also going to be our center. I have a very different design I'm doing this time. And then this is from my scraps. We have this like textured white. It kind of has like little white pattern inside of the white. So it's a neutral, but it's nice because it has a little bit more. And then this will be our backing, which is actually left over from the quilt that I made my daughter. Today, I literally wrote down a whole sheet of what we're doing. So I was really inspired by one of the things in Joann's. It was like a picture of, not like an ad, but like their like how-to. And it was like a striped quilt, which I've never done before. Pretty much every quilt I've ever done has looked like this. Like, you know, just the normal squares with the batting in the middle and then on the back. I made a quilt, another baby shower quilt, and it did have like the lining, the strip on the outside, the bias tape. This one, I did not do that. So this is like the most simple quilt you could do. And so this would be the first time that I'm kind of venturing out. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna do some stripes along the outside. So I'm gonna do kind of like 2-inch pieces. And then in the middle, I wanted to go with more of like a pattern with the neutrals. So it's going to be squares that are inverse. So we have the color here and the white here, and then the next square is the opposite. So we'll see how that goes. It's definitely going to be a lot more math, measuring, cutting than I'm used to, but I'm really looking forward to it. So let's get into it. The first thing I did was start out with my teal fabric and pre-cut everything I'm going to need. So I started with my central design. These are just 4.5 by 4.5 inch squares. And then I moved on to the binding strips. So I just cut out 3 2-inch strips out of the teal to create the binding. All right, so I have my binding, and then I cut out my little center design. I didn't even film the white ones because I cut them in the most backwards way. I also really need to update my rotary cutter. I just cut with these scissors because they're the sharpest things. I have a rotary cutter, and every time I use it and cut, it like does that weird thing where it doesn't cut all the way through. And then I bought a new wheel, but it was too big, so it's a problem that I really need to fix, but I find myself cutting more precise with the scissors because I take my time. Anyway, I'm thinking about how I want the stripes to go, and I definitely want this one to be one of the bottom pieces or like the edge pieces because I think it just looks so good with this color, which will be on the outside, kind of like this, you know? So I definitely want this to be either like one of the sides or the top or the bottom, but this will definitely be in that first rectangle. But now I just want to decide what will go with it. I then yap for minutes on end about this whole detailed plan that doesn't even end up working out, and I end up going with a pattern anyway. So enjoy this montage of me creating more work for myself. I then got out all of my fabrics to create the strips that I need for the quilt. I just cut them at 2.5 inches all the way down and cut out as many as I could throughout all of the fabrics. As you could see, my rotary cutter does not work very well, so I ended up using scissors for most of it. It is a new day. That cutting took the life out of me. If you are going to do a quilt like this, buy a jelly roll because that cutting almost took me out. However, I did get to customize the fabrics that I wanted. It just took forever to cut these little strips out. Again, I think I just need better quilting tools. Like my mat is only this big, so I have to like do it 3 times per, like, you know, the quarter yard, whatever. I just need to do better at getting good quilting items. But off camera, I took the time to kind of lay out an idea of how I wanted the quilt to be. I did expect that my middle piece would be bigger, but as I was making it, I felt like if I made it bigger, it kind of took away from the strips and almost made them too haphazard, because then there wasn't enough of each pattern to kind of make it feel cohesive. The next step will be to actually cut out my triangles, and then I'm going to start sewing. So before I do that, I'm going to give you guys a look at the rough layout of what I decided for the pattern. It's definitely a really rough look at it, but this is generally how I want the quilt to go. So this would be the top, this would be the bottom, and I kind of tried to create like a pattern. So I did, you know, like the little Loch Ness monster, the twinkle twinkle, the green, the blue, into the orange, into the camping, and then it started all over again. Doing it kind of just haphazard and deciding like each layer, it kind of got too complicated. So I think creating the pattern kind of gives a nice blend. And then we have the little pinwheel situation with the teal, which will be the binding color, and then the extra white that I had just to kind of pull a little bit more color into it. The next thing will just be to start sewing it all together. As I opened up this part of the quilt, I could see that the angles were just not a crisp 90-degree. So this is where I begin just seam ripping forever and ever and ever, and then sewing over, and then seam ripping, and then sewing over until I could get that really perfect crisp edge. So I did have a really hard time getting the edges right doing it this method. Here's your PSA to follow a pattern and don't wing it, because I got that corner good, but I forgot that the green has to go over the camping. So I'm gonna have to figure that out now. Okay, so going to do the green, and then after that I'm going to cut the camping to then go onto the green as well. This is definitely becoming a lot more complicated, and I should have just done the math and cut it all out, but here we are. The worst thing when you're in a sewing groove, your bobbin running out. As you can see, it is yet again another day. This is taking me way longer than I anticipated. One, because I did not even look at the instructions. I just saw a picture of a quilt I liked and said, I can make that. So follow the instructions of patterns. It's very important. And 2, I'm working around this. So off camera, yesterday, day before, whatever day it was, I just troubleshooted the issues that I was having with this. So we have the first 2 kind of strips. I realized at like 2 in the morning the other night that I should have started inward out. It would have just been so much easier, because trying to combine these corners to make them crisp is just so hard, and like I don't even have these cut right. Like in my head, I was just like, oh, I'll just lay it out and then that's the length and I'll cut it. I cannot stress it enough. Just follow a pattern. But so it looks really good so far. Like obviously I'm taking more time than I need to get it done, but the results are there. You know, it looks good. So that's important. I don't want to now start working inward out now that I've already started working outward in, because I don't want there to be like a weird gapping or anything like that. So I'm going to continue going like this, but I will kind of prep my triangles in like centerpiece. I think that will just, I don't know why, it's just appears easier in my head. I don't know. Here I have my already finished part of it. This is the next piece that I'm attaching. So how I kind of troubleshooted the issue of the corners is take your next fabric, place it on for the bottom, like line it up so that when you flip it, it goes like this. And then what I've been doing is I've just kind of been measuring how much I will need for then this seam up here. So you can see I've got like, you know, the 1/4 inch over what I need, so that when it comes up, I can then stitch here and have a nice seam here as well. For the most part, it's been working. A couple times I'll have to like seam rip a little bit and kind of go back in to make sure the corner is just like perfect how I want it. But yeah, you can see it's pretty much been working pretty well doing it like that, but we'll see. I'm glad that I just pinned it all, because then I realized that now both of these are starting on the same level. So that was kind of my issue yesterday. I fixed this because I had these two on the same level, so then this one went all the way, which it just doesn't look right. I don't know how to articulate it, but you can see they're like staggered. So I'm going to actually pin the whole layer around to make sure that they're all in the right spot before I start sewing, so I don't have to seam rip for like the 50th time. This is what I mean now. So this one here should not go all the way up to the dragon, because then it would be the same length as this twinkle twinkle. So I need to put the orange, and this camping will go up to the orange. So that's the mistake I was making the other day, is I was just not paying attention to where the strips should end and where they should start. So I've sewn the orange on and on both sides. Now I'm going to start doing something I should have done from the beginning, which is cutting them. This fabric is going to come right up to the orange, but I'm going to leave just a little bit so that I can sew these two together. So now I will sew this edge, and then I will sew that one on the other side once I flip it. So I decided to start with the smaller strip, so sewing it to the orange piece, and then I'm going to sew it lengthwise here. And then I just gave myself enough space that I can go back and add more stitches, but I want to be able to have enough seam allowance to sew it to this side. So now we have it at the top, and we just need to start doing the side. Today will be the final day working on this. I will probably be working until the dark, which has honestly been the biggest issue, is that I run out of daylight. But it does not matter today, this is getting done. Now, I have had several breakdowns about how this is working out, and it honestly has somehow worked out very well. But my strategy of not cutting has worked, because then I have wiggle room and I can keep editing. However, it makes it so much harder to create the joints, like the 90 degrees, because you have so much fabric that you're not actually meeting at the same point sometimes. Like, that has been tricky. However, I'm happy to have the extra fabric because I'm always making mistakes. I just don't know why I worked so hard cutting out all the strips, planning, and then when it came down to it, I just scrapped it all. But the best thing I've found is if I do the short edge first and then sew the whole length and then sew the final edge, it works pretty well. My suspicions were correct. If I started in and went out, I would have had an easy job doing this. My life would have been 10 times easier. I did start doing that yesterday, but then I didn't like how the centerpiece looked, and I just scrapped that idea because I was worried it wasn't going to match up then on the outside with the rest of the strips. So we're going to continue just going inward with it. It's not bad. Like it is working out. It is just a lot of seam ripping and then doing it again and then seam ripping and then doing it again. I also have to keep reminding myself it is handmade. It's going to look handmade. It's not going to look like a professional machine mass produced it, because it's not. It's made with love. So I'm going to be a little easier on myself. We're going to finish these borders and then add the centerpiece here. So now I was just prepping everything for my centerpiece. So what I actually did was the flying geese method, I think it's called. So you mark where halfway is and you have both of your triangles together. And then you sew on each side a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And once you've finished sewing them, you actually can just cut down that center line, and then you have your square already made with each color on each side. So that saved me so much time and measuring, and it was super simple. So then I just gave it all a really good press, making sure that the seams were on the dark fabric so that you couldn't see it through the white fabric. I then just placed all of my squares to make the pattern that I wanted, and then sewed it all together. Before sewing the two halves together, I again just gave it a really good press so that it would be really sharp and crisp once it was sewn together. And here is the final result, just a nice pinwheel design. The last step was just to press it flat. All right, so I have it all sewn out. Again, it's not perfect, which is kind of driving me crazy, but like I said, it's handmade and it's going to look and feel handmade. I had to recut this to make it all even on the edges. The edges were really just so wonky for whatever reason. So I do still have a little bit of a gap, but it is kind of even all the way around. So I think it would look really cool if I put this on another fabric to kind of have one full color around it and like no corners, like just have the fabric here. I don't know if I can explain that well, but I'm going to show it in a moment. I went through my stash and maybe this like light green color. I can't tell if I really like it or if I think it matches, but I just thought it was cute because it kind of brings in like the light green from these trees, because you know, on the camping fabric we have the orange, the teal, the like light blue, the dark blue, but we didn't have any like light green like this color, so maybe that pulls it in. My other thought was maybe to just scrap the pinwheel altogether and just keep going with the fabrics. I have enough of the strips to do that. I'm gonna just take a look at it for a minute and also maybe revisit my stash to see if I have anything else. I decided that I did like the green, so I went ahead and cut out some strips to attach to the pinwheel. Here it is, all nicely sewn together. Off camera, I just pinned it in place to get it all ready to sew. I then just gave it all a really good press, and here is where you should not follow what I'm doing. I cut out the batting and the backing to the exact size of the quilt. I have now learned that your batting and your backing should be larger because it will shift, which I did have that happen. However, I also didn't do the traditional stitching on the top of the quilt. I did plan on doing that, but I felt like it just exasperated all of the imperfections of the quilt. The next step was just to attach all of these together. It was then time to combine the 3 strips I had made for the binding into 1 strip. So how you want to do that is you actually want to sew it on a diagonal so that when you fold it over, it's just less bulky. I then folded the strip in half and gave it a good press to prepare it to being attached to the quilt. Transparently attaching the binding is where it really fell apart. This was the first time that I was trying this method of attaching it to the front and doing a mitered corner. I have never done this before. And when I went to flip it over to sew the back, I had a lot of issues with the raw edge coming through. So as I was troubleshooting that, I actually cut through the backing of my quilt. I was so upset. It was heartbreaking. You'll see I do end up mending it, but it means that there is kind of a hole in the back. Once I did get it attached, I did the stitch in the ditch method, what I've heard. So essentially you don't see the stitch on the front because it's in that seam, and then when you flip it over, it's just a straight line. This right here is kind of where I had issues. Like, you could still see the raw edge if you moved my fabric. And then here is the repair I made of the hole. And here is the final reveal of the quilts. I honestly am really happy with how it turned out. I think it's really cute, and I really like this size. It's really perfect for putting on like a stroller or a car seat. It's definitely not crib sized. If you're still here and you're still watching, thank you so much. If you enjoyed, please like and subscribe, and there will be more videos to come.